we are going hyper specific. So for UW fans, I'll also say for Oregon fans, everybody doesn't like UW, or even the Coug fans, right? You want to learn about Jedd Fisch's second year. We are the place today. We're going to talk about year 2 under Jedd Fisch. We also, as a guest, presented as always by our founding partner, 76, it is Christian Capel. You know his content on Montlake. He is an amazing man. Can't wait to hear about his journey with Substack, a fellow Substacker as well, Jim. And just an overall great guy who, to us at least, like, covers this team with tremendous detail. I don't want to make it a competition, but if you're looking for an answer, Christian likely has it around the dogs. That's right. So we'll even ask him about Nigel Burton's son, because we love watching Jace. We've seen him, right?
He was listed in his most recent article, or second to most recent article at the time of this recording. I've got my, even though you mentioned, the Washington audience, the Oregon audience, a few other audiences, and that one you didn't mention was the Arizona audience, which is still a good portion of them have still not kind of gotten past things. But as you can see, even despite all of my Arizona-ness in the background here, I am wearing purple today. It is a Beastie Boys shirt, not a UW Husky shirt, but I'm trying to heal the wounds here. Like it's for us, the Arizona fans. And I know we're going to talk about some guys that were at one time Arizona players, coming up here, but it's time to turn the page and just worry about what's going on.
Okay, so let me ask you that, because that's an interesting note, because amid realignment, and I think the knee-jerky or like the sudden changes that have happened in the sport that we love so much and cover with tremendous detail from here in LA all the way across the country. We even had Kalen DeBoer on the podcast about a month and a half ago. To me, Jedd Fisch leaving Arizona was like 5 years ago. I know it wasn't. Right. But it feels like that, because there's so much that has gone on. Right now we have spring ball with Brent Brennan, and we've talked about this. It's truly his team, right? Tetron McMillan preparing for the NFL draft. Noah Fafita comes on back. It feels like it's his team. He's lost, obviously, some guys to the portal. A couple other guys went to UW, but I don't feel that anymore. But I didn't go there, right? I don't live it like you have as an alum. I'm curious, in the circles you run in, have they moved through that yet, or is that still like a salty wound? Because we're going to talk about Jonah Coleman. We're going to talk about some of the players that had been at your school, Jim, that now are donning the colors up in Seattle.
Yeah, I think it's on a little bit of a pause right now, because March is still Arizona basketball season, and with the run that they're going on, that's where the focus of most people in Tucson is right now, is on the basketball team. So like once that ends and it truly turns back into, okay, it's football season, Jacob Manu just left, Takario Davis just left, there's a few more guys that just left from this past season to go there. But I think the wounds aren't as deep as they were. And I think, being in different conferences, just you start to drift a little. That's what we're here for, is to kind of keep everybody together. But you do start to like drift a little bit more, because you are looking at, like, as a UW fan, you're like, oh, what's Iowa's schedule look like this year? If you're an Arizona fan, you're like, oh, who's the quarterback at UCF this year? You're starting to ask those questions, and maybe not as dialed in to some of these other schools that you have been to in the past. So it will be interesting once basketball season ends and the calendar comes back to football season, how much attention UW gets from the fans in Tucson, or if they're ready to move on. Personally, I'm ready to move on. I have a different viewpoint. Obviously, I haven't lived in Tucson in a long time by this point, even though my family still is in Arizona. But I had a working relationship with Jedd, being in the conference and being in coaches meetings and stuff like that, and having, getting feedback both ways in that sense. So like on that respect, I don't view it the same way as your average fan in Tucson. I can understand their, how they felt about things, but like for me, I think about what I'm using the royal we here for Arizona, what we were prior to Jedd, and it was really bad. Like it was a time where you don't want to go back to. And I think we need to celebrate pulling out of that more than like what we're missing out on now.
Yeah.
Or technically, or quote unquote missing out on now.
Yeah. I think there's so many layers to that. Like, with our kids, when they come home and they're like in a mood and they light you up or they light me up based on like the littlest thing. By 8 o'clock at night, you realize that there were like 5 other things that happened that day that got him to that point.
Right.
And I think that it's important to note, like, I think there's a conference thing that happens sometimes. Like, here's the Big Ten. Granted, UW is not getting a full share, but it's got so much more money than everybody else. And then here's the Big 12, which is like, no, don't slot us in CFP spots. Like, let us compete with that. So I think there's like layers to the timing, of course. Look, I got no problem going to revisionist history. Like, Jedd was waiting on a long-term deal at Arizona too. That's widely been discussed that never showed up, right? For whatever reason, right? Clearly the schools had concerns around, finances, et cetera. Neither here nor there, because today's focus is on UW. Jedd Fisch is there. I will continue to stay on the table. I'm a huge fan. I've known Jedd for over 20 years now. I think he's a really gifted coach. Year 2 for him, or as he will always like to say, hey, his first year there is kind of a year 0. It's ground 0. You're trying to just navigate it. I thought they navigated a new conference in NIL at a really high level. Like, and by that, I mean, the way that it works now, like, here comes this second portal window. In our opinion here, this will be the final second portal window ever. Right. I believe that next year, Jim, what's going to happen is everything's going to move to June. There's going to be one portal window. It's going to be like the NFL and OTAs. Bye to spring games. Like, you could have a showcase. You can have fans there. I hope that stuff still happens. I know Jedd loves it. But in my opinion, everything I'm being told, like, this entire calendar is going to shift. So to that point, last year they get there. And when you get there as late as they do and you hit that second portal window, who are the most valuable people in the second portal? The big guys. So you just get leveraged, and there weren't a lot of elite players up front. So UW, to me, said, all right, well, let's not spend the farm in year 1 in Seattle. Let's save it for now. Now their salary cap, you can call it $15, $20 million to really make the moves that they think need to be made. In addition, we've talked about this in previous episodes, DeMond Williams, the quarterback. I think as of today, among the people we know or believe to be the starters in this league in the Big Ten, DeMond Williams is the most dynamic dual threat quarterback in the league. Most dynamic, and a seasoned player. He does not look like a freshman when you see him. He's a physical, he's a thick dude. We had him at the Elite 11. I can't wait to watch him. They got a couple other people that are going to return for this season. So I'm curious for you, Jim, like, as you look at the landscape, I know you did some research on this, like, big picture, how do you see UW? And then I'll give you my thoughts on where I think they're going to go heading into the spring.
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head there with the offensive line, because I mean, you think about those 2 years with Michael Penix, and I thought, obviously, I think one of the underrated but yet defining stats in that Penix area was how few times he got sacked.
Yeah,
his last year there. They got the UW quarterbacks. I think they were all Penix. I'd have to go back, but the UW quarterbacks as a whole got sacked 11 times in that season. Last year, 39 times.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's obviously different style of play, different. There's all sorts of factors that can factor into that. But offensive line is such a huge piece of that, and I know that's one of the things that Christian has written about many times over this offseason about how they're fixing that up. But to your point, they've got a lot of dudes coming back that are exciting on the offensive side. And they're coming off what is really kind of like just a bonkers kind of season when you really look at it. Like, they finished the year 6-7, which, I'm not one to usually hang a hat on the bowl game result, but there's a different mentality of coming out of a 7-6 season to a 6-7 season. Is that, even though that's that one game swing, but they were 6-0 at home last year, 0-7 outside of Husky outside of Husky Stadium. Yes, because I'm trying to think the neutral site game was in Seattle,
Lumen
but
Field. Yeah.
Yes, but so outside of Husky Stadium, they were 0-7, which is obviously they got to figure that out. But on that offensive side, you look at DeMond Williams. He took over those final 2 games. The last game of the regular season against Oregon, and then the bowl game, lights out. Jonah Coleman, a former Arizona guy. We saw his build the progression, capped over 1,000 yards last year, 10 rushing touchdowns. Had 23 catches out of the backfield as well, so multi-talented there. And then Denzel Boston is probably going to be one of the top receivers. He was one of the top receivers in the Big Ten last year, but he'll be really high on that list for this upcoming season. He had 63 catches last year, 834 yards, 9 receiving touchdowns. But the guys that were all around him, whether it be Josh Jackson, Jeremiah Hunter, Kaleki Latu, a tight end, like those guys are all gone. So he's got to figure out how they're supplementing him, so it's not just a one guy attack in that passing game.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Of those 39 sacks, I think 9 came against Oregon, where Damon Williams got the start.
I think you're right.
So I to your point, like I say it all the time on this. It's like a bad record. Like you have to have scars at the position. Damon has them, and he's just plowed his way through them. Everything I've been told about him this offseason has been electric and elite. They're on the verge of starting spring practice, is why we are bringing on Christian Capel. I think an interesting storyline is the departure of both coordinators. I mean, you had such a unique environment there. You had a guy who we know well in Brendan Carroll, and then you had Steve Belichick. Of course, their fathers are Bill and Pete. They have both gone to North Carolina and the Raiders, respectively, to work for their Hall of Fame coaching fathers. So Jedd Fisch, he's got a massive network. He doesn't flinch. Elevates Jimmy Doherty, who's been with him since he's been at Arizona, and he was with him when he was at UCLA there for a moment. Remember, Jedd was the interim head coach when Jim Mora was let go back in the day when Josh Rosen was the quarterback, and DTR was there as well. So I'm excited for Jimmy. I think Jimmy's a stud. He's the next wave of head coaches. They win 8-9 games next year, which we'll get to in a second. Jimmy Doherty's going to have a lot of shots to call his shot. Whether that's a group of 5, who knows? But I think Jimmy has the tools necessary to be a head coach. Then they go on the defensive side. They get Ryan Walters, who was the head coach at Purdue. And the last time he was calling defense, it was best defense, I think, in America, in Illinois when he was there. And he's a young coach, right? Coming off a 2-year stint that clearly was challenging at Purdue. Lessons learned. And now you get to go into this Jedd Fisch organization that is really built like a pro model, right? That is the thing that every program is saying they are doing, with the GM side of it, personnel side of it, the football side of it. But Jedd's been doing it since he got to Arizona. You go back and listen to my podcast when Jedd was with the Rams in LA. I had him on, and he talked about his vision, his philosophy, how he would see a program. He talked about the pro model then. We've seen it implemented now at 2 different stops. So I think it's a really cool opportunity for both of those coaches to coordinate their respective offense. They also just elevated the offensive line position. Tremendous regard for their now current offensive line coach. So I think they're in a really good spot. And then I go to this, man, the XO side of this thing. Jedd Fisch's X's and O's, I think, are as enjoyable to watch as anybody in college football on offense. He calls the plays. He's one of very few guys that are still calling it on offense. And they're always in position to win the game. Like, I get it. Some of those games last year got away from him, right? I called the Indiana game. You go to the game against Iowa, the Rutgers game. It was like they were in a club on a Friday night. It was absolutely crazy. It was bonkers. But I think lessons learned, and now away they go. So you look at their schedule now. Florida, to me, is bowl game. Ceiling is, can you get to 10 wins again? I mean, you got Colorado State, future Pac-12 school. UC Davis, which we all love. Welcome to Shredville. Huge fan of their head coach, Tim Plow. They won't be easy games to kick the party off. You got 2 at home. Then you go to Wazoo. We know what that'll be. That'll be a challenge. But you're more talented team heading into this year's rivalry game. The sting will always be there, but it won't be as what it was a year ago. It's just going to be different. It's going to be hard to go get that win. But on paper, you start off 3-0, get Ohio State at home. Okay, that'll be hard. Then you go to Maryland, chance to win that game. Rutgers at home, got a chance to win that game. At Michigan, okay, that's a challenge. Illinois is a top 15 team walking into the season. They're kind of like, they'll be the sexy team. Everybody will put them in the 10, 11, 12 seed in the CFP heading into the season. At Wisconsin, up in the air. Purdue should win on paper. UCLA up in the air on the road late November. And then Oregon. So again, like, you don't leave. And I love this stat that we come up with every year now with the Big Ten. From November 8th is the last time they're going to leave Pacific time zone. So their last 3 games are going to be out west. And I do think that matters. USC dealt with that last year. I think that it helped them. UCLA dealt with that last year. I think that it helped them. They're both going to deal with that again this year in terms of not having to necessarily leave the time zone. UCLA leaves it once. USC doesn't leave it at all in the final month of the season. So for UW, 6 wins is the floor. Can they steal one with Illinois, Wisconsin, UCLA? we know what Ohio State and Michigan are. Who knows? I mean, there'll be fun games. We'll tune in and watch them. But the point is, Jedd's X's and O's, I believe, will always give their team a chance. And you have a dual threat quarterback. And you know you have coordinators that are really savvy, especially one who's got Big Ten experience in Coach Walters. So I can't wait. I'm going to be up there in a couple of weeks, a little over a month for their spring game. Man, it's going to be so fun to come on back and give a recap, because now we're about to get a preview from Christian, and I cannot wait to hear from Christian Cape. So anything you got, Jim, before we get to him?
No, it's funny, and I'll end this with another Arizona part of this. Like on the defensive side, like there will be a lot of familiar names, for 2 sevens and stuff like it, because you have Prysock and Takaria Davis at the corners. We'll see with Jacob Manu what his deal is after getting hurt last year, and how he recovers, and is he going to be able to fill in, because they're gonna have a hole at linebacker. Carson Bruner's gone, Tuputala's gone, so from obviously a very biased skew on that from my lens as I'm looking at this team, but they got to figure out how to win some road games this year, and I think they have winnable road games this year when you look at it. Wazoo, Maryland, Michigan, Wisconsin, UCLA. They needed, I would say, at least 2 of those.
Yeah, the lessons learned from Rutgers last year, I think, will be such a benefit to this team, because that's Maryland, right? We saw with SC, they lost at Maryland, which they should have beat, right? Minnesota, I think Minnesota was a better team, you could argue, but you could have that debate back and forth with those two. But for UW, I think the lessons learned on the road in year 1, I think it'd be monumental for Jedd Fisch. Can't wait till they get to spring ball, because it's now just a matter of almost hours, it feels like, before they kick it off. We will be there in about a little over a month.